Reaganomics explained. Have you wondered whatever happened to Reaganomics? This was Ronald Reagan's big idea to achieve broad-based prosperity through supply-side tax cuts. How did that all work out? Let's take a look at the evidence. As you may know, in 1981, Ronald Reagan introduced supply-side economics as a tax policy to eliminate federal budget deficits and achieve broad-based prosperity. Reagan proposed that tax cuts targeted for job creators, that is, rich people and corporations, would stimulate business investment, grow more jobs, and raise workers' wages. Best of all, the booming economy would increase government tax revenue and eliminate those deficits once and for all. This version of supply-side theory became known as Reaganomics. The notion that lower tax rates will bring in more tax revenue does not seem to make sense. It's based on the Laffer Curve, which shows the relationship between government revenue and the tax rate. At a 0% tax rate, there would obviously be no tax revenue. As the tax rate increased, so would revenue, until it maxed out at a sweet spot. Beyond that point, the burden of the high tax rate would depress the economy so much that tax revenue would actually decrease, until it zeroed out. Arthur Laffer was an economist on Reagan's advisory board who argued that the top tax rate at the time of 70% was choking the economy, putting us to the right of the sweet spot. By reducing this tax rate, we would unleash a boom in corporate profits and personal income so that government tax revenues would actually increase, bringing us back to the sweet spot. The Laffer Curve was an appealing notion to the wealthy because it provided a justification for cutting their taxes. This would be a win-win-win. Lower taxes, a stronger economy, and a shrinking budget deficit. As the money flowed downstream, the rising tide would lift all boats. It was almost too good to be true. And, to be honest, not everyone agreed. Many claimed that supply side was a scam, a con job to justify tax cuts for the wealthy. They feared that the rich would keep their windfall and the flow of money downstream to the middle class would be no more than a trickle. They disparagingly called supply side trickle-down economics. Worst of all, they said, the budget deficit would not shrink. It would skyrocket. Some even called it a Ponzi scheme. Let's turn to the history books to see who was actually correct. When Jimmy Carter was the Democratic president in the late 1970s, he struggled with a large federal budget deficit. The red bars in this graph show the size of the deficit each year as a percent of our total economic output, with 2% as a target to try to stay under. By 1980, the deficit remained over target. Presidential candidate Reagan could not resist scolding Carter over his poor control of the federal budget. In 1981, his first year in office, Reagan gave us the first big dose of supply-side tax cuts. He cut the top tax rate from 70 to 50%, cut the capital gains tax from 28 to 20%, reduced inheritance taxes, and lowered business taxes. True to form, these tax cuts were concentrated in the upper tier, among the job creators of corporate America. The first visible impact of the tax cuts was, disappointingly, a huge loss of government revenue and an immediate spike in the federal deficit, which skyrocketed, quickly topped out at nearly $200 billion, and remained unacceptably high throughout Reagan's term, only to swell even more under his Republican successor, George Bush Sr. As a solution to Carter's $80 billion budget deficit, Reaganomics was a miserable failure. Nonetheless, we are working on a theory here. So how about the working class? Did the booming economy and all this federal borrowing line their wallets? Did the rising tide lift their boats? Most definitely not. Over 8 years of Reagan, the real median income of workers went up by less than 3%, and it was even worse for workers at the bottom. In 1981, the average income of the lower half of Americans was $16,400. By 1988, Reagan's final year, it was $100 less. How about the other part of Reaganomics, the impact on economic growth? This part seemed to work. During Reagan's tenure, our national economic output, after a slow start, grew by a healthy 3.5% per year. Without a doubt, Reaganomics spurred a decent growth rate in the economy over 8 years. Or did it? Under Reagan, taxes went down, while spending went up, massively. The government simply borrowed the difference. In numbers far beyond any previous president in peacetime history, Reagan ran up the credit card. While 39 presidents before him had accumulated about $1 trillion of debt in total over 2 centuries, Reagan alone borrowed nearly twice as much as that entire amount, nearly tripling our national debt in just 8 years. It was the exact opposite of what he had promised.
Starting next year, the deficits will get smaller until in just a few years, the budget can be balanced. And we hope we can begin whittling at that almost $1 trillion debt that hangs over the future of our children.
In all honesty, how could the economy not have boomed? It received the largest peacetime artificial stimulus in American history. Anyone who has ever owned a credit card knows how that works. So no, where it mattered the most, Reaganomics failed the worst. We borrowed money we didn't have and gave it to people who didn't need it, as a giant tax cut, while hugely increasing our spending. The massive deficit stimulated the economy, sure, but the folks in the bottom half gained nothing, while our debt tripled in size. As for the Laffer Curve, most available evidence now suggests that the sweet spot happens at a top tax rate of 70%, the very spot we started at before the first Reagan tax cut. The Laffer principle, then, that cutting tax rates increases tax revenue, the anchoring principle of supply-side economics, turns out to be a laugher. Hi, I'm Nate Link, and I hope you were enlightened by this video essay. To see what happened next in the history of supply-side economics, go to snickersnack.com and tune into my video essay, Reagan, Clinton, Bush, a 3-phase experiment. Thank you.